Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Nutter and welcome to our next Nutter webinar. Today's program is addressing systemic racism and social inequity in Massachusetts. And with us on our panel today is the core leadership of the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund. And we'll have a discussion today about the creation of the fund and the mission of the fund and what it hopes to accomplish. For you folks who may be new to this webinar today, I'd like to give you a little background. I created this speaking series about 20 years ago, and we've had almost monthly a breakfast and lunch series, and we've had a wider range of speakers come to the firm. And it's become a place where we invite people that we meet and clients and friends. And it's become a very good place for people to gather and to facilitate friendships and relationships. And we've had governors and mayors and authors and sports people and industry leaders. And it's really become something that I enjoy very much. And today is no exception. Today is no exception. And we have an excellent panel, and I know that we'll have a good discussion. So I welcome everybody in the audience who has joined us. I thank all my partners and the business development group and everybody that helps me put these webinars together. And of course, I thank all of our panelists who I'll introduce in a moment. The way this came about, last year when George Floyd was murdered and the fund was created, I attended several business groups that I'm on the board of. And I want to welcome folks from the Mass Business Roundtable, J.G. Chesloff, and folks from the Mass Taxpayers Foundation today. But the business community was very interested in finding a way to respond, to talk about diversity and inclusion and social justice and racial justice. And so I just felt at that time that I wanted to have a program. I didn't know exactly what, but then later in the year I had Mayor Walsh and his chief of equity, and I had former Governor Deval Patrick in November, and we talked about these issues. Then in December, I was reading the Wall Street Journal one day, and there was an excellent article about Eastern Bank, about diversity, social justice, and so forth, initiatives at Eastern Bank, particularly at its governance level. And it was an excellent article. If you haven't read it, I think it was in December. And so as a result of that article, I reached out to Quincy Miller, the president of Eastern Bank, and I asked him if he would like to do a program like this. And he said yes. And then I reached out to Linda Dorsino-Fori, who's on the program, Rebecca Sawwalser, who's on the program, and we put today's program together. And so I want to thank them. And then Damon Hart, who's also a member of the fund, joined us as well. And so I welcome each of you, and I welcome the audience. And again, thank you very much for your continued support of this of my webinar series. I'm planning the next something for March. I might reach out to Linda to see if we can duplicate the old St. Patrick's Day event, but folks may advise me against that. But we'll see what we do. But again, on our panel today is Rebecca Sawwalser, the executive director of the Red Sox Foundation. And Rebecca has great experience in philanthropy, in sports, and so forth. She went to Brown. She worked for the Boston Celtics in community affairs, and then she ran as director the Scholar Athletes program at Suffolk Construction, which John Fish created. And Rebecca, I have great memories of those events at the Boston Garden with all those kids who were graduating from high school and and going on to college. It was a great place. And Becca, of course, was a professional soccer player with the Boston Breakers, and she lives in Dorchester, and she has 3 children. Also, with us is Linda Docino Forey. Linda's an old dear friend of mine, and she's the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion and Community Relations at Suffolk Construction. Suffolk is a very involved community we're very involved in the Boston community, but Linda, since she has been there, has really extended the reach and extended the impact of Suffolk in the community. Linda, I met when she worked in the State House, the Charlotte Golar Ritchie in the 90s, and she became a state representative. She became a state senator, and then she went to Suffolk Construction in her current position. She's a BC grad at Harvard School of Government, and again, her and her husband Bill have several children, and they live in Dorchester. There's a theme of Dorchester in this panel, and so Linda, welcome to us today. Damon Hart, of course, is the Deputy Chief Legal Officer at the Liberty Mutual, and he's an employment lawyer, the Chief Employment Lawyer. And Damon and I have a bond. We both went to Holy Cross, and we were talking about Holy Cross while we were waiting. Holy Cross did a bold thing, a good thing. It selected a new president 2 weeks ago. This is the first lay president of the college. For you folks who probably know, the Jesuit order of priests run Holy Cross, like Boston College. And the new president is a lay person, the first ever. He's a black man, Vincent Rougeau, who's the dean of Boston College Law School, where Damon went to law school. So Damon, welcome. Quincy Miller, as I said, is the vice chair and president of Eastern Bank. I read the Milton Times recently, Quincy, and I saw that you went to Lafayette. And Quincy he was a flanker on the football team. And he intended to try to be a free agent in pro football, but he decided to go work at M&T Bank, and then became president at Citizens, and for the last 10 years has been at Eastern. And he has just become, in the Boston community, a very impactful person in the community. So welcome to each of our panelists, and thank you for doing this today. Anything you want to say before we start? Anybody? Linda?
Thank you for having us, Bill. We're excited to be here, and we look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. And even though you're a Holy Cross grad, I won't hold it against you, since you invited us here for this wonderful event.
We used to beat you in football down there at Lafayette, I think, in the Patriot League.
Yeah, a little bit of Patriot League rivalry. I also just am very pleased to be here, especially given that it's Black History Month, and I've said this before. I'm mindful of the fact that we are actually making and creating Black history by creating this fund, and it's just been one of the pleasures of my life to work with this illustrious group that is just so focused on this mission. So very glad to be here.
Thank you. Becca? Thanks.
I mean, Damon's, you can't say it better than he just said. That's why we have him around, is to speak so eloquently for all of us. No, I would just echo what everyone says. Just any opportunity to spread the vision, spread the hope, spread the purpose of this fund is meaningful. So real gratitude and thanks to you, Bill, for convening your network and your cohort of followers and friends and family, and allowing us the space to share more information and ways to get involved and support our efforts with the fund. So thank you.
Well, you're all welcome for that, and I am very grateful. I'll start the conversation with the context. And in Wednesday, January 20th, on the 19th, I actually was invited by Michael Curry of the Health Center League to join the MLK breakfast, and I did. And I was taken by a lot by those speakers, and the theme that I got was that there's still much more to do. Still much more to do. That's kind of a common theme. We've come a long way, but more to do. Wall Street Journal and the NAACP took out a full-page ad in the Journal, entitled The Fragility of Democracy. And it started out talking about the January 6th events at the Capitol. But in the article, there are several quotes, and these are the quotes. Our corporate and business community should be a force for the change that advances the ideas of justice, equality, and opportunity for all. And the Edelman Barometer dictates that businesses are uniquely positioned to take a leadership role in establishing trust in our societal institutions. What is your reaction to the NAACP ad? Is the business community positioned to be a force for change? And how should the business community take a leadership role to address racism, social inequity, and injustice? And Quincy, can we start with you? And I know you're engaged, your company's engaged already. Do you think you're positioned to be engaged more?
Yeah, so thanks, Bill. So first and foremost, if you read the rest of that quote, which I think is really great, I think it sets the stage for something that Easterns believed in greatly. And what it really says is, we urge you to use your formidable voices and resources to support tangible initiatives that advance justice, equity, and opportunity for all. Right. And to your point, they were speaking to corporations. This is, the idea of being able to break down the systemic inequities within our Commonwealth and within our country cannot be simply done through, the government sector. It can't simply be driven through nonprofits. It has to also be driven through corporations, and corporations stepping up. The idea of corporate social responsibility that no one really talked about a decade plus ago in ESG is becoming the norm. And it's important for corporations to step up in a tangible way, in that it's the right thing to do and the smart thing to do. It's the right thing to do because we have a responsibility to the communities and the customers that we serve, but it's a smart thing to do from a business perspective as well, because our largest workforce today is the millennial generation. They're not only our largest workforce today, but they're about to become one of the wealthiest generations as this country sees the largest wealth transfer in history from the baby boomers down through to the millennials and the Gen Y. And so, this call from the NAACP is about doing the right thing, but it's also just smart business at the end of the day.
Well, that was certainly the premise of Carol Phelps' book. I had Carol here, I think, before she retired. And not only is it only the right thing, it's the smart thing in terms of business. Rebecca, what do you think about the NAACP quote and about the role of business? Now, the Red Sox Foundation's been around, but it's just not about throwing baseballs out on the field anymore. It's more than that. And you're pleased how you see your business role?
Yeah, when I think about that quote, it makes me realize that professional sports teams have a real additional unique opportunity to play a role in this space and in this work. And by that, I mean, sport is a convener. We can leverage sport and use it as a powerful tool. Fenway Park is a convener. We have a brand as the Red Sox, and we have a responsibility to leverage that. And what I'm inspired about is the recent work. And I know this forum isn't about the work I'm doing at the Red Sox, but we're doing a whole bunch of real honest work around social justice, equity, and inclusion that I'm leading within the organization. And the ability to leverage those assets, those unique assets, I think is incredibly exciting for me, particularly as we think about the work of the new Commonwealth Fund going forward, and how the Red Sox and other professional sports teams can play a role in advancing, as the quote says, advancing the tangible initiatives around justice, equity, and opportunities for all. So just an exciting time. And I think, where I get kind of overwhelmed is all the innovative ways that we can work with the Red Sox brand and other professional sports teams to continue this mission forward.
Well, I do want to thank you, Becca, to the Red Sox for its role in the vaccine. I just wanted to, I was remiss in not saying that at the outset. I wanted to thank, and please pass that on to Sam Kennedy if you would, and others. Thank you for that. Thanks.
Of course I would. And don't forget the voting. We were an early voting site, which again, the voting rights and access is a huge piece of this. So very excited to continue using Fenway Park as an access point.
David?
Yeah, sure. I agree with the quote. I think, and it's kind of hard to have this conversation without getting somewhat political, but I'll say in particular with the vacuum of leadership in the federal government in the past 4 years, business has to step forward and has had to. And I think it's a natural place. And as Quincy said, businesses can't prosper if the cities and communities they're working in and doing business in are not prospering either. And I think about, just a lot of the kind of flashpoints of the past 4 or 5 years where you think about like the after the Muslim ban happened, how many CEOs stepped up and made comments for the first time on issues like that? Or when you think about Charlottesville or other things that happened that were flashpoint events where companies were speaking out in a way that they had never done before. And I think it's a good thing. And, Quincy mentioned the ESG movement and also the differences in generations. I think it's really important for all the businesses that made comments and tweeted things and put things on Facebook and LinkedIn after George Floyd, that there are a lot of eyes watching for the follow through, and to make sure that it's not just an in vogue kind of statement and it's actually changing policy. And I think that it's part of the role the fund plays. We will not let the corporate attention move on to whatever the next thing is. It's been far too long. I recently saw a James Baldwin interview, and he was talking about his parents and his grandparents, and every single generation of Black people has been told to wait. And I think the time is now to actually make some real progress. And so I think it's great that business is stepping forward. And like I said, we had a discussion at Liberty Mutual this past week about the cost of racism. And there's a new book out from Heather McGee about the cost of racism. And she says there's studies that show that we're missing multiple trillions of dollars of our GDP because of racism. And so, yes, it hurts everybody in a psychic and emotional sense, but racism hurts us all economically. And Carol mentions that in her book as well. So I'll just stop there and leave room for my good friend, Linda.
Linda? Thank you, Linda.
Damon. Thank you, Bill. I'll say, first of all, it's great that you framed it and opened it up with the NAACP piece, right? So the fragility of democracy. And I hope everyone reads it because I think they put into writing what I hope everyone feels, right? After the horrendous actions and insurrection and violence that happened on Wednesday, January 6th. And so, this is where we are at a crossroads. And in there talked about that a little bit, an inflection point of who do we want to be as America, right? What is it that we want to present and share with the world, but really share it within the USA, right? And I think that is important. It also talked about, how do we make laws that institute, fair voting rights for all people? We see in the last couple of weeks, stories have come out where states are trying to take away people's rights, right, in voting because of the outcome that just happened in the last election cycle. So for us, as we think of, the message of the NAACP, there's various aspects to it, but no doubt the business community plays a role, right? And business communities have come to the table over and over, right? When we look at education, when we look at housing, when we look at transportation, the community, the business community and sector has a role to play. And I would say, just to add, as we think about the new Commonwealth Fund, that's one of the reasons, right, we created this fund, really because we believe that the business community is playing, but must play a more active role in really trying to create and sustain the change that the country needs in dealing with systemic racism. This is not something that happened overnight. You know, the murder of George Floyd, he did not die in vain because it was during the pandemic. We are at home. If you have children, you're homeschooling, a mom of 4. You said several children. People are gonna think, Bill, I have 10 kids. I have 4 kids, but and so, right, Becca has hers. Okay, I'm just clarifying for everyone. It's not 10, it's 4. You know, and so in this moment, you know, we also had 8 minutes and 46 seconds of another horrific event. Right? But there were murders before that, and we knew that, right? Ahmaud Arbery, who was jogging in his mother's neighborhood, but 2 men in a pickup truck gunned him down like he was a deer. It's horrendous, right? We had, you know, Amy Cooper, an executive, a C-suite executive who I'm sure went through unconscious bias training and so many other things. And yet for her, because this Black man told her to put a leash on her dog, she weaponized her whiteness, right? And called the cops on him. And so these are the different layers. And going back to the business community, you have a role because you've been playing a role. And so the new Commonwealth Fund, you know, that's why we started it. First, as 19 Black and brown folks in corporate America. It is an incredible group. I didn't know everyone. I think I know everyone. I don't. But this group has been quite amazing because we've been meeting like every week. Since when, Quincy? Sunday, June 8th.
Yeah.
That's right.
Been having meetings when we formed the organization. And for us, it's us, yes, but it's also the companies as well, right? This dismantling systemic racism doesn't happen on its own. NCF is not going to be able to do it on its own. It's everyone that has to be in it together. Government, private, public, you know, all the sectors coming together and saying, you know what, we've had enough. We want to have these tough and uncomfortable conversations because that's what it's going to take. And this is how we're going to move the ball forward.
Hey, Bill, could I just add one thing that Linda made me think about is that the intentionality of where we're at, like it took a lot of intentional effort to create this system. And it's going to take intentional effort and strategy to unpack all of it. You know, anytime I think about history and I think about how creative the oppressive system has to be to continue to morph and change. And, you know, you have the emancipation, and then you have Reconstruction, and then you have Jim Crow, and then you have the new Jim Crow. All these things to create and sustain a system are intentional acts. And we have to partner with, you know, business and policymakers and government to unpack all of it intentionally.
Well, you each have touched on my my next question, and Linda and Quincy and everybody is, you know, just to talk about the fund for a moment. I want to give an opportunity to sort of talk about the why and the what, and the audience may or may not be familiar with how it was created and why. And the quote that I had on that, of course, was, "The fund is starting as the country undergoes a racial reckoning after the killing of George Floyd. In the aftermath, corporate America has wrestled with as well." So if you just talk about for a few minutes as to how, Linda just referred to the first meeting in June, but how it came about, the conversations, the vetting of the idea and the mission and so forth. If you could just, Quincy, if you just talk for just a few minutes about what the core group of leaders, that's how I refer to your 18 people, how you came about to do this, and had you discussed this before George Floyd, or whether it was, you know, cause and effect or just something. So if you could, Quincy, could introduce the audience who may not be as familiar with it, maybe as I am because of this panel, but can you tell us about the what?
Yeah, sure. You know, it definitely was cause and effect. You know, as Linda mentioned, we came together on that early day in June on a Sunday, and it really sort of started from a grassroots text. You know, I got a text actually first from Damian Wilmont and said, you know, hey, I know, you know, I'm sure like me, this has been a terribly difficult time for you. You know, what do you think about getting together some Black and brown leaders in corporate America and just corporate America here in you know, Boston and the Commonwealth, and just talking about what can we do? And then that's really how it started. And then, you know, I said, okay, great, grab this person and grab this person. And we were really, but it was really corporate led in the beginning. So that was, and part of that was because, Bill, so many of us were being asked by our companies, like, what do we do? What do we say? How do we address what's going on within our own companies? If with this wrecking on race that was just beginning to happen after George Floyd, and again, I won't take the whole thing, so I'll allow the rest of my team here to share some of the perspective. But you know, so those early discussions were really about you know, a little bit of therapy for us, because that was a really difficult and painful time for all of us, talking about what we were doing. But we had never thought to honestly come together like this prior to that. I mean, this was the inspiration. And when we came together, we quickly thought about, how can we use our influence, our power? How can we leverage our corporations to lean into this greater than they had ever leaned in on the past, and support breaking down the systemic racism, barriers, and inequities that impact Black and brown people together across the Commonwealth?
Damon, I'm going to use the word pressure, or the encouragement to do something after George Floyd. Did it come up from the employees of a company like Liberty, or did it come down from the board in the upper, you know, the governance structure? You know, to do, we should be doing something. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think, you know, Quincy's right in terms of it was coming from everywhere, I think, in terms of everybody asking, you know, what do we do? How do we react? How do we respond? I think the new Commonwealth Fund, though, it was more of a personal responsibility, we were all feeling anguish. And, you know, Quincy talks about the therapeutic part of it. And I remember just most of the conversations are, okay, so when are you speaking to your organization with your CEO? And everybody was like, oh, I'm doing it Tuesday, I'm doing it Wednesday. And we were all carrying this pressure. And in addition, trying to, you know, I got 2 kids, 2 teenagers. We're all trying to decode, what does this mean for them? We're all grieving personally. I mean, George Floyd and I were the same age. We're the same size. That could have been me. I've been pulled over for no reason whatsoever. That definitely could have been me. They didn't ask about my title and my education when they pulled me over. So that hit me hard. And I think we all felt like we've got to do more. And so coming together was something that was brand new and doing it different and building it out. It's innovative. So that's kind of my perspective on how we all got together.
And Becca, what was it about when you got the call, if you were called, and that you thought this is the right thing for the Red Sox to do? What was it about?
Sure. Like Quincy, I got a call from our good friend Damien, who I'd met years ago through my sister Rachel. And when Damien calls, you answer. And I, you know, as soon as he started speaking, I was in. Because as Damon said, I think it can't be put into a measurement, the internal grief and sadness and anxiety that I think so many individuals were personally feeling, having witnessed such brutality that we knew. Listen, it wasn't new, it won't be the last, but to see it so cavalierly done, right? And everybody in the world probably saw that video. So it felt like it was the perfect call that I needed, because it was yet another avenue for me to hopefully make change. And to your question about the Red Sox, you know, I was also very inspired to hear Damien talk about the intentionality. And I know Damon said this word, but that word means a lot to me when I think about philanthropy and when I think about investments, is intentionality. And the real focus that we have on Black and brown led organizations, on Black and brown, predominantly Black and brown communities. You know, being in philanthropy, I see the lack of funding going into those communities. I see the lack of funding to Black and Brown led organizations. And so being part of something that's being intentional with those investments is really powerful to me. And I feel that at the Red Sox, and that's, you know, I feel privileged to have that role because I know these things, right? And I can start to align some of the resources and leverage some of the resources in places and in ways that are going to move the needle on outcomes.
Linda?
This is, first of all, it's a superstar team, right? I mean, this is just incredible. I'm just gonna say that, you know, the other piece I would say, you know, Damien again, right? Damien, the mastermind, who called and said, hey, we're pulling this group together. Would you like to be part of it? Of course, right? Because like everyone said, you know, this is the moment. And we didn't think about it before, but this was so traumatic and so tragic. And I would say, to echo Becca, it was casual. It was a casual killing because the officer had his hand in his pocket. You know what I mean? Just like he's on a walk in the park, right? It's crazy. And so when we came together, happy we did. One, the other piece that happened as well, as the 19 members, we seeded the fund with our own contributions, right? Over $1 million. And then we asked corporations and continue to do that because we know this work doesn't just end today. It's a continuation, like we said, right? If we want to help break systems and systemic racism and the whole system, then we all have to be in it together. I would say that the other piece for me, it was Sunday, June 8th, when we first met. And you know, in my company, we were already leading and having these tough conversations, right? In terms of saying racism is here, you know, like what are we gonna do to break it? And it wasn't grassroots, it actually started from the top, right? So John Fish was like, I'm gonna lean in and I wanna understand, like, how do we break this thing, you know? But it's not just break, you know, to say break systemic racism, as Damon said, you know, it took 400 years, right? And I would recommend to everyone to watch the documentary 13th, right? It gives you a snapshot in an hour and 40 minutes, you know, what happened, right? With the African-American experience in our country. And I say all that because it's an education of everyone. So it's not just, you know, white people, right? Or folks who are not Black and brown, you know, but it's an education of the Black diaspora. Right, I'm first generation American. My parents came here from Haiti. I'm born and raised in Dorchester, speak Haitian Creole. But again, the ethnic community needs to understand the experience of the African Americans here in America. It's very, very important because then the Latinx, the Asian American, the Native American, 2 or more cultures, right, will understand, wow, this is generational trauma. Right. And so for us coming together as the NCF, what was amazing is we put money ourselves, we went to the companies, and so far we have, I think we have a pledge of over what, guys? I think 30 million, right? Over 4 years from various companies, individuals who want to lean into this space. And so that's the work we have to do together. But also as companies, we know there's impact, right? Because companies in the last 3 months have been pulling sponsorships, right? Of major, you know, whether it's political folks or other companies or media outlets, because they don't want to stand for that value. And so again, we are in an inflection point as to who do we want to be as America. But as company A, company B, company C, who do you want to be, right? As an organization, as you work to build your teams and build trust and transparency, who do you want to be? And how do you look within your boardrooms, very important, right? Your executive leadership, there's one thing bringing people in the entry level, but how do we make sure when positions are opening that you're creating positions that there are opportunity for ethnic diversity, Black, African-American, Latinx, Asian American, Native American. I will no longer say people of color just as a whole bucket, okay? So that's the other piece. How do we get our companies and ourselves comfortable saying African-American and Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian American? And to do this and to do this work, and I will wrap up now, the work on racism is not just on Black, it's not just a Black issue, right? Because the last 7 months with COVID-19, we've seen what's been happening to our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, right? The xenophobia, the racism, that they're being attacked in our country because they're Asian. Because a person that was in the White House, right? I'd say an Oompa Loompa, but you know what I mean? That was there, you know, is, you know, what was like stoking the fear that it's the Asians. And so this is what's happening in our great country. And so we have to be honest in having these conversations, leaning in. Doesn't have to be adversarial, everybody, okay? Because we don't know everything. No one knows all the answers. But as long as we're willing to be honest in creating the space and the place for people to be able to be who they are, to show up as their authentic selves.
And Bill, I know we have a lot to cover, but I just want to say, and that's what we are trying to do different about this fund, which is, the reality is, just because we are corporate leaders and executives here across the Commonwealth, we have that shared lived experience.
Yeah.
That shared lived experience of racism in our lives. And I remember when Lee Pelton wrote his letter, and people were like, wow, like this happened to Lee Pelton? And, you know, Damon's comment of he's been pulled over for doing nothing. So have I. Like, this is what we have lived. And the idea of taking philanthropy and having it to be led by people of color, in support of people of color, and then bringing the community together, not just this isn't about the 19 of us sitting up here and doling out money. It's about engaging the community, engaging community leaders to say who's making a difference and how do we help funnel philanthropic dollars to those organizations who've been left behind.
Well, my next question as a follow-up, Linda said you raised money at the outset. I read that your goal is $100 million. I saw the other day that Black Lives Matter raised $90 million last year. $90 million last year. So so you want to funnel this money into Black and brown led nonprofits, which are chronically underfunded. So I guess my next question is, you know, we talked about the organization of the fund, fundraising, of course, and like the question I missed was, and maybe you can incorporate it, is if you're talking to a company beyond your 18, what do you say to them? I know you've talked a little bit about that, but when you think about how you're going to now reach out to the community, reach out to these organizations, what organizations will you consider? We had a question, is it Boston or statewide? I know it's statewide. I saw in your article there's an organization in Springfield that was quoted in an article in the Globe. Any particular focus? What's the process? You gave out $1 million in November, $50,000 each to 20 organizations. So what is the fund's priority as it thinks about what it wants to accomplish and who to whom and for what it gives funds to? Damon, do you want to try that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think well, you heard a lot of it in terms of you know, Black and brown led organizations. We have 4 pillars. Criminal justice reform is the first one. Healthcare equity, you know, and obviously coming off of in the middle of a pandemic, that's super important, and we've seen how that's played out for Black and brown people. Economic empowerment, and then youth education and civic engagement. So those are the 4 pillars. Those are the focus areas, and we spent a lot of, I'd say, the better part of the first few months kind of narrowing in on that and how we wanted to leverage that. Quincy mentioned it as well. I mean, it's not just a check. It's a higher level of engagement. We want to share our skills, our strategies, our ideas. We want to make these organizations better. We want to better position them to better fulfill their goal. We also want to be a clearinghouse of good ideas. We want to be a place where we bring people together, not only just from our networks, but the networks of our grantees, to bring them together to share expertise and kind of lift the whole community. So that's what we're doing that's different, and that's a differentiator in addition to, you know, our own kind of personal commitment. You know, we've been, as Linda mentioned, we've been meeting at least once a week for the past year, and you know, we probably can't sustain that level of engagement, but we will never be just a fund that has money and we're detached from it. It's too important and too personal to us. So I'll just stop there. I know the others have a lot to say on this issue as well.
Becca, anything there?
No, I mean, Damon really got to the heart of our 4 principal core areas. And I think, you know, having focused on this work myself with our foundation, those are the 4 critical spaces that I know this fund, my organization, other organizations have identified as the real triggers that could make positive, lasting change. And so I think for us, having those as our continued kind of North Star, if you will, and real focus and principles will guide us towards achieving those long-term outcomes. But again, I think it's important to remember this isn't something that has an end line, a scriptable, readable end line. Like, this is ongoing long-term work. There's not one organization that we're going to fund that's going to solve it. There's not 2, there's not 5. And so I think just having that in mind, that there's no formula for answering this problem of systemic racism, that's something that's so deeply baked into the ingredients of our nation. And so I think just remembering that this is going to be a long-term effort, one that must be sustained, not just by us as deeply passionate and personally committed by our own lived experiences as we are. It takes a village, and we can't do this work alone. And calling upon the resources within our Commonwealth, within the city of Boston, is critical to our success.
Becca, in your capacity with the Red Sox and this transferring that to the fund, how do you, maintain accountability with the organization to whom the fund is supporting? How do you maintain that? I saw that you reached out, you being new fund, reached out to organizations to consider the fund, apply to the fund. So how do you have that accountability that you know what the fund intends is being carried forward by the organization whom you support?
Absolutely. You know, I think one thing that I've been really, really deeply moved by this group's focus is on trust-based philanthropy. And, you know, what I've seen in my 15, 20 plus years now working in philanthropy is the laborious reporting structure that actually takes away opportunities for direct service and work, which is like just nonsensical. And so I think that true focus of ours to make sure that we believe in the leaders of the organizations we're investing in, that we believe in their people, in their work, is kind of paramount to the success of our investments, because we know that they're the ones that know their constituents. They know their communities better than we do. And so when you talk about accountability, I think for us, we want to believe and trust in our investments and the people that we're committing to, if that makes sense. And that answers your question.
Linda, I want to ask you a question. Becca said that this is something that has to continue over time. And so my question really is about sustainability. And I want to quote Quincy. I have a quote that you gave to the Milton Times, the paper of record, the Milton Times. And
How about the Dorchester Reporter? Okay, go ahead.
thank you, Dorchester, which I'm a loyal subscriber to, of course. This is an opportunity, Quincy said. This is an opportunity. We want to make sure this is a movement, not just a moment. This is a movement, not just a moment. It's something that's overwhelming. It's never exhausting. Could you, Linda, talk for a minute about it's not a moment, it's a movement, and the idea of how do you, in fact, keep it sustained?
Yeah. Very good, Bill. I mean, and great quote, Quincy, because it is a movement, right? And as we said earlier on, you know, so much has happened before George Floyd, and yet, you know, demonstrations happened, and yet it did not quite take. So this is a movement. And I would say, how do you sustain it? You know, what's interesting is for us, as we work with the corporations and folks who are giving, it's really to understand that the organizations that we're funding, if you look at studies, they disproportionately do not receive funding, right? In terms of Black and Brown led nonprofits are not the ones that are getting the line items in the state budget, right? And I say that, for instance, you know, prostate health is a big issue in our Commonwealth, in particular amongst men of color, African-American and Black and Brown men. And, you know, we fund a major prostate health organization However, this organization that was on the ground, FEN, in our communities that was doing the work really got pennies to the dollar, right? So what we've done, like trust-based philanthropy, is really identify the nonprofits that are doing the work. So they have outcomes, right? They are doing the work, they're touching the people, they are in it. They're just not getting the funding and the resources. So for us, as we support these nonprofits, it's also connecting them to our corporations, right? Or to other companies in the state to recognize their worth and their value, to see if they could get additional funding from the corporate side as well, which is important. So it's a journey. This is not a one and done for us. You started it off. We want to raise $100 million, right? And so yes, on the Commonwealth, whether it's companies, individuals, but outside of the Commonwealth as well. And I think for 400 years of inequities, 400 years of systemic racism, it's going to take everyone in it together, moving in that direction. The other piece I will add to that is that, you know, 3 of us serve on the Boston Racial Equity Fund, right? So it's myself, Pamela Everhart, and Mo Cowan. So we work in partnership with the city. Dr. Carolyn Crockett, who's the chief equity person for the city of Boston, what they decided to do is to really transition, because they see that we're moving, right? We're getting money out there, which is critical in this moment, to get it into the communities and get it to these organizations that are building up and really trying to move people out of poverty and building wealth. They transition money to our organization. We are Commonwealth wide. It was important for us. I just want to state this for everyone. There are 351 cities and towns in our Commonwealth, and we were purposeful in our name, because we want people to know this is a Commonwealth thing, right? The Boston Fund, though, that they just transitioned to us, we're going to make sure that that money is given to nonprofits in the city of Boston, which is important. But if you saw the 20 nonprofits we did, you know, we went all over the state. And it was a trust base. We went in and reached out and heard from other organizations that have been on the ground, you know, doing the work, that are saying, oh, this would be a great nonprofit too. And we did the due diligence to see who we're going to give the money to. But this is a continuation. We're asking folks, you know, to join us in this journey. But I'm going to say this to the corporate folks: do not forget the nonprofits you're already funding, right? And that's our big thing. We don't want you to divert the funds from nonprofit A that you've been uplifting and supporting for a while and say, you know what, I'm going to take that 500,000 and I think I'll just give that to NCF. No, we don't want that, right? We want to not cause harm. So that would not be helpful. And that's something we've talked about as an organization as well. Quincy?
Yeah, I think, see, the point that Linda just hit is whether you're an individual, particularly the corporations, this isn't about splitting the pie differently. It's about bringing another pie to the table. If we're really going to address these inequities, we have to make greater investments. And like the 19 of us knew, and all the things that we were doing individually, we realized we actually had to do more. We had to double down on the work that we're doing and the investments that we're making. We had to bring more to the table. And that's really what we're challenging corporations to do. The reality is what we've raised so far is primarily come from about 30 organizations and a number of countless individuals, employees within our organizations. We're just getting started in the fundraising drive here. But if we bring all the corporations within the Commonwealth making this commitment, raising $100 million is actually easy. And I think while it's, you know, it may be a stretch in this environment to make that additional investment, the reality is that stretch is going to pay multiples of dividends in allowing these nonprofits to be able to grow and thrive.
I just had a follow-up question. I meant to ask it when you were talking about the first round of grants, and I read that they were COVID-19 focused. Can I ask you a question? I just got my vaccine the other day at the Carbon Square Health Center. And is any of the funds going to encourage members of the Black community to get the vaccine?
Yeah, great question. So we're just getting ready now to, as everyone said, we meet every week for hours. We say we meet once a week, but it's for hours. And we've been strategically working through how are we going to now provide our grants. And so we are just getting ready to be able to, you know, soon open up how organizations will be able to apply. But our health pillar, right? That pillar of health equity, one of the 4 pillars we chose that obviously there's a long history of health inequities, but COVID is the glaring picture right in front of us right now. And so you'll see a very intentional effort around how do we support COVID vaccination and COVID education and the organizations that are on the ground making those differences.
It wasn't as busy as I thought it would be there on Wednesday afternoon. I got to tell you the truth. It just wasn't. My wife and I walked up and we went up to Common Square. It just wasn't. And I was quite surprised that it was down on the Messina Hall down on Talbot Avenue. It wasn't that busy.
Wow, okay.
And I was just, so I didn't mean to go back to that, but I wanted to ask you that. Now, thanks, Quincy. Thank you very much. How, you kind of touched on it just now, but maybe at the end we can talk about it, is if you wanted to give a message to a company, a sales pitch, or whatever you want to call it, what would it be? We can go back to that, but how will you evaluate and measure the success of the fund?
So I'll start with that. So one of the ways is we're trying to, again, invest in these organizations who've been left behind because of philanthropic redlining, right? Because of corporations and foundations, this self-fulfilling prophecy of always finding the organization that's having the largest impact and having its scale, right? And so all the money continues to go to the organizations that are the largest. And what we're getting, and particularly, and it's left behind for those that are black and brown led, that are on the ground actually making change. So one of the ways that we'll measure our success is those nonprofits' abilities to scale and grow, and not only, take their model from Springfield and bring it to Lawrence, right? Because we've invested in and helped them be able to grow, or spread it across a greater community within Boston. So I think that's one of the key measures, is helping those nonprofits scale and grow. And then I think as we look forward in terms of breaking down the systemic inequities of those 4 pillars, it's really about one of the greatest things I heard of the first 20 is I heard so many people say, and this is a question in the chat, like, how do you connect with some of these black and brown led nonprofits? The reality is the PR that they've received from the support from the new Commonwealth Fund is a great opportunity for corporations and individuals to step up and go, I didn't even know that organization was making that great impact within my community. So that's another byproduct of the way that I think we'll be able to measure our success, is not only the funds that we provide to them, but the funding that comes in from the exposure and opportunities for them to grow.
A lot of these nonprofits look to the same sources for funding. I mean, everybody goes to this particular foundation or the Red Sox or whatever it might be. They all seem to go to the same places, and that's always a competitive issue, making the case of why they should be a recipient. So that will be a challenge. But Damon, how would you measure? How do you know? How will you know that this fund is being as impactful as you would envision and hope it will be?
Yeah, I think Quincy hit on it. And one of the things I wanted to say about the grant making process is that, hands down, that was the best Zoom call I've ever been on. When we look those black and brown led nonprofit people who are in it because they care, and told them, and it was a surprise that we were going to give them money. It was amazing. I mean, to me, that was success right there, getting to that point. But I think it's an ongoing process as we're looking at how we're measuring the impact. As Becca mentioned, we're more in the trust-based space. So we're looking at investments on a long term. I'm pretty much a novice in the investment space, but investments are measured over a long period of time. We want to be like that in terms of the way we're looking at these organizations and being with them for the long haul and empowering them to do their mission better. And so that's what I would say on the success. If we're able to do that and see them expand and grow and see them get to scale and see them get publicity and thrive, those are some of the measures that I'm looking at.
This is really something that I've been thinking about, and maybe it's because of my age, maybe it's because, but I do have a sense that there's a different feeling in the air that is the time now that we've had protests, we've had legislation, we've had other sad events, other initiatives to end racism, and other initiatives for social justice. Am I alone, or do you agree that there is a sense that the time is now? It seems to be. And what is your sense of the now, Linda? Am I naive about this? Is just me hoping this is the case, or is there more to it?
I mean, I don't think it's hoping it's the case. I believe it is the case, right? Because sometimes you have to hope it and will it into action, into being, right? But I do believe that, you know, everyone has been awoken and everyone wants to talk and have this conversation on systemic racism. And everyone wants to, you know, understand how business community, government, nonprofits, how they can really help in dismantling it, right? Because it's not just going to be NCF, it's going to be all of us working and having these tough conversations to do it. And I think I see one of our NCF partners, Dr. Maisha Jordan, I'll just put this, and this is how we do it, is the NCF's ability to create an ecosystem, right, of funding and investing in Black and Brown organizations is going to be a key aspect for us, you know, as an entity. But I do think, yes, we can hope it, but I know everyone's been touched, not just by the 8 minutes and 46 seconds, right? But also what happened on January 6th in our Capitol as government was in session, full Senate, full Congress, the vice president at the rostrum. You know, something horrible happened, but we knew something was brewing. It was before 4 years, because growing up as a 13 or 12-year-old, I remember watching 60 Minutes in 2020. I'm dating myself, you guys may remember this. But when they would talk about militias, remember those stories? Militias, they're stockpiling guns in the middle of our country. I mean, this has been happening. And so I believe that there is hope. We have an opportunity to be in it together, and we're asking you all to join us. We know you're doing things already. We're asking you all to help NCF as well, as we really concentrate and focus on these nonprofits in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that we want to see grow, but really as they help the communities, the individuals and families that live in those places.
Bill, Bill, I was just going to say, I mean, the Commonwealth, I mean, the Commonwealth is known, I mean, the commitment of social justice that's happening across the Commonwealth is an inspiration for the entire country. But what I'd say is there is no social justice without racial justice. Right? We will never get there as a society until we are equal and have the same opportunities, no matter the color of your skin or your sexual orientation or where you were born. I mean, these are things that we have to change for the good of our future.
Becca, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, Quincy just made me think of, I don't know if you guys have seen the vans from Dana-Farber that drive around the city. They have their logo on the back, which is "Until Every Child is Well." Yeah. And it just made me think, like, when I think about this work, it's like until every Black and Brown individual, until every Black and Brown community is well. And I think that's, you know, that's how we've got to look at this. Is like, we're in, this is a fight every minute of every day of every year of our life, right? And in the same way that we approach healthcare and cancer, it's this, racism is a cancer.
Do you think, does Boston, and as a lifelong person here, does Boston's unflattering history sometimes on events create any particular challenges to you, to the fund, as you do your work?
I think, you know, in the fund, I think the fund is actually going to help with shedding that light of Boston, born and raised in Boston, Black girl from Dorchester, right? Bill Dorchester, born in, I mean, but we have our issues, but we've come a long way. And so when you hear the narrative every time that it's Boston, Boston, we wear it. I'm going to go back to this. We live in a Commonwealth, 351 cities and towns. We need our communities in this Commonwealth to get real, to start having conversations on race. Because when Black and Brown people are leaving Boston and they're driving through these communities, they're being stopped, right? I thank Becca, Sam Kennedy, when the incident happened at the Red Sox and the person who said the N-word to the player, Boston wore that. That was not a Boston person. Because I worked with Sam and Tanisha Sullivan to do the Take the Lead campaign, right? That was not a Boston person, but we wore it. And so as a state, we need to get serious. All of these communities need to have the conversation, right? You may not have majority people in your communities, like in your companies, you may not, but you have to have this conversation. It's gonna be uncomfortable, but let's get uncomfortable, because we have to be uncomfortable to get comfortable in moving people forward. And the final piece I'll say, I want people to absorb what they've seen and to see it through their lens. When the Irish came here in the late 1800s, right here in Boston on the Boston Common, no dogs, no Irish. The signs on the wall, no Irish need apply. So I need our allies to absorb what your great-grandparents and your great-parents faced, or your parents today may have faced, right, as a new immigrant. As the Italians came into Boston, living in the North End in these ghettos where there were no bathrooms in the apartments, right? I need people to absorb their history, whether you're Black, Latinx, Asian, absorb it, Irish, Italian, absorb it, and times that by 100 to understand the African-American experience and the Black experience that's happening. That's very important. To recognize that we are all in it together, right? We look different. I'm gonna drop a little Creole Kijanouye, right? We're gonna speak differently, but we're the same, right? Because we're human beings. And so let's stand up for one another. Let's treat people the way we want to be treated. Let's speak to people the way we want to be spoken to. And that's how we're going to change the world. And that's how the NCF, with you, Bill, with our corporations, with individuals donating, that we're going to have serious impact in our state in holding people accountable.
Thank you, Linda. I'm going to meld in, because we're running out of time, but
Sorry.
meld in. No. And thank you, Linda, for sharing that. 2 questions. I always ask a question about hope. Do you have hope? Do you have hope that the fund can make the lasting and meaningful change that our communities of color need? That's the basic question. And then I want you to meld into that, please, a closing statement of what do you want us, the audience today, to understand, to appreciate, or to take away from today's conversation? Damon?
Yeah, sure. But I can't let that moment pass. Linda, it's time for the altar call, man. I'm ready.
Right? I'll be there.
You touched me in a deep way, and I love it. I love your passion, and it's been a real pleasure. Yes, part of the thing for me is working with this amazing group. I said at the beginning, and I really do mean it. We get this often, so I'm very grateful for that. I love James Baldwin. James Baldwin made a statement following the death of his friend, the killing of his friend, Martin Luther King Jr., and he went into a deep depression. And then he summoned the courage to make this statement: hope is invented every day. And we've got to manufacture hope. We've got to invent it. We have to have our active participation in it. So yes, I am hopeful. I definitely think that we can do it. When we think historically about the reputation that Boston has had, the people that were throwing rocks at those buses as they integrated schools are still here. So are those people that were on those buses. It's saying ancient history. So it's just going to take a lot of work to continue to change the narrative about the Commonwealth. And it's going to take some money. So after hearing Linda, I would go on the website and make a donation.
Becca?
Sure. I think it's important to know that this is not something, because I know we've spoken so specifically about Black and Brown led organizations and Black and Brown led communities. This is not something that will only impact those cohorts, that demographic. This is something at the end of the day that will be good for Boston, that is good for our Commonwealth, good for the 351 cities and towns across our Commonwealth. And so I think having that, stepping up with the view of it and not just saying, well, this will only help them, not me. No. This is going to help everybody. And I can't wait to read the book, Damon, that you referenced by Heather McGee. We all, and Carol Felpett said it in her book, this is economically beneficial, right? And I know that's one of the focuses of your conversations, Bill, when you convene people, is thinking about the bottom line of this. There is a benefit there if you need to hear it that way. And so just making sure we have that public understanding of our work is it's not just for one specific demographic. This is going to help all of us.
Linda?
We thank you, Bill. I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for giving us this moment with the Nutter webinar to be able to talk about the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund. We also say NCF for short because we know it's so long. But we thank you for this opportunity so people can understand who we are, why we came together. It is a dynamic group of folks, I got to tell you, and the energy every week, it's compounded, right? And we're on it for hours, but it's so awesome because it's so refreshing. To see that we're all rowing in the same direction and believe in access and opportunity and giving people a chance, right? But we also have to recognize that folks have been left out and systems and barriers have been created to leave people out. Situations have been formed where families have been broken, okay, to leave people out. And if we want to rectify that and change it, then it's going to be all of us, government, nonprofit, the whole nine, right? All of the businesses doing it together, white and black, everybody, Latinx, Asian, Native American, two or more cultures, just everyone working together and not just letting it be on one person's shoulder because we cannot shoulder it ourselves, right? And that's the hope, right? That everyone was awoken, the conversation continues, and that keep the door open for conversations. Very important. We're not always going to agree, but it's okay, right? We're not going to agree all the time, but let's have you at the table and let's talk about it and see how do we move forward.
Thanks for that. And the sustainability issue is one that I think about, the timing and the why now. And so Quincy, we'll have you conclude, and I just want to thank, before I turn it over to Quincy, to thank you all. I'm humbled that you would accept my invitation, and I hope that you would use my events here at Nutter to invite your colleagues or people you want to introduce us to and meet. And I'd always be, my door is always open here at the firm. The firm is very supportive of meeting new people, and so please feel welcome going forward. I hope this isn't just a one-time thing as well. So thank you. Quincy, I'm gonna, since you and I started the conversation in January, and I really did enjoy the Milton Times interview. I really did, and I thought that was great, and you make some interesting comments there. I'm gonna ask you to conclude for us and think about my hope question and what is the message that you want to leave us with today. I was overwhelmed by the number of, usually we get a couple of hundred people, and today to hit the RSVP list at 5-something was just kind of, I felt that you and I and the other folks, we did the right thing. So Quincy?
Yeah, well, again, first and foremost, thank you, Bill. Thank you to Nutter. The reality, what I ask people to leave on is really the words of Linda Dorsina Ford. I got to tell you, I never, I'm someone who does a lot of public speaking and I enjoy it, but that message was powerful, right? It was, and I think what I would just say is what you quoted before. And I think what we sometimes worry about, right, which is this discussion, it can be exhausting, but we have to be, we can't be put off. We can't be let it hold us back, that we are going to have this conversation. We are not going to be deterred from the mission of being able to make this country and make this community a better place for our children and our children's children in the future. And that sounds cliche, but 400 years of systemic inequities and systemic racism, we can't let that, we can't stand for that anymore. And this community is now woke. Now that you're woke, you can't look past it. You have to take the time. You have to make the investment. You need to do more And we need to do more as individuals. We need to do more as corporations. We know that, you know, the new Commonwealth Fund is one aspect of how you can do more, you know, in terms of supporting with your treasure, but you still have your own time and you still have your own talents that you can invest in these organizations and in the, you know, in your local community across the Commonwealth who are making change. Get involved and make a difference. Let's not put off to tomorrow what we can do absolutely right now today. So thank you, Bill, so much for having us.
Oh, listen, no, thank you. You're all welcome. Linda, of course, us who know her and see her, no matter if you're in the line at CVS or if you see her on Lower Mills, she's always on. It doesn't matter where or when. It doesn't matter. And this is not an unusual presentation of energy. This is something I think we all appreciate hearing, and we look forward to the future. So listen, everybody who's on the call today, I want to thank you all for joining us. And again, thank you all on the panel. Best wish to everybody, and hope everybody stays well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. Thanks.